Hey, this is Frank Josa, CEO of Ketone, and I'm super excited today to have a doctor from Belgium on board. I'm going to let him pronounce his name so that I don't mess it up. People mess up my name all the time, Frank Josa, the double L's, O-S-A. But go ahead and say hello and help us with your name.
Hello, I'm Dr. Dag Van Elslande. I'm from Belgium, and yeah, my name is not so easy to pronounce.
Okay. So do you mainly work with professional athletes in sport, or are you also a doctor for regular patients on a daily basis?
I work all year, so I work with a lot of patients. I have still 50% of my job is general practice, and the other 50% are what I call high performance people. And they are artists, businessmen, and also, of course, elite athletes in all different sports, Olympic sports, endurance sports, but also fight sports, Formula One, car racing, motocross.
Great.
I'm a bit everywhere.
And right now it's day 2 of the Tour de France. So are you watching that? Do you have anybody in there that you've trained?
My TV's on, but it's not on yet. It's the broadcast is due in half an hour, I guess. And I think of the 200 participants, I know closely at least 30. So, and of these 30, more than half are using or have been using ketone esters already.
Great. And you've been deep into ketone esters for 2 or 3 years now, trying to, spread the word to your athletes that don't know about it or don't believe it.
Yeah, I think when Kieran Clark papers was out, I invited her to the Sport Congress. It's a sports medical congress that I helped to organize here in Belgium. And that was like the first time we had somebody talking about ketones in Belgium. And later on, I invited Professor Di Paolo, who works in Italy. All his life is devoted to ketones, but more into scientific setting for children with epilepsy, where no other medicine helps. So I'm quite interested in ketones, and I have also a long parkour in it with a lot of errors and trials. Right.
Yeah, and I'm just fascinated to talk to you today about different protocols. I mean, we have our own protocols that are kind of designed for the average person that are taking smaller quantities, but then when it gets to the elite athletes, everyone wants this cookie cutter, chug this bottle at this exact minute, and they think it's like caffeine, that it just, you add it to any time and it just works. And I'm trying to explain that, some people call it a competitor to glucose, the ketones and glucose compete. Some people think that it augments it like a second fuel, but it's just really, really tricky to use it. And when I get a phone call saying, actually last year I got a call from a Tour de France rider that said, tomorrow I'm going to be attacking and I'm going to try and win the stage, and I've never used ketones before. How do you recommend I use it? And I was just like, oh my God, I don't. Now I gave him a protocol that was very conservative, that wouldn't mess him up, but not even close to the optimal maximum that you could use. So how did you start seeing some performance gain? Was it the papers that you read, or real life situations, or using it yourself? How did you start to see, getting the athletes to use it, seeing some numbers?
Of course, we had the papers and the talks with the scientists who were behind it, and then we tried to be smart, like the rider you talked about, and initially we thought, okay, it's an additional fuel, so it's 1 + 1 is 2. So we say, okay, take it at the end of the race when it goes really fast, and you add the ketones and you have something extra to burn. Quickly, we found out that didn't work. And it's still the mistake that many athletes make. They come to me and they say, yeah, my son is riding an uphill race tomorrow, and I want to give him some extra fuel. And what do you think? I'm going to give him a bottle of ketones right before the start and right before the climb. And if they ask it before, they're lucky, because then I can warn them. but usually they did it before and they say, oh, this doesn't really work, and he was never so bad, and he has to drop from a peloton from the first kilometers.
Yep. Yeah.
And
That's a super important thing. When it works, it works. But when it doesn't work, it can make you drop out of the race. I mean, we've had someone lose $10,000 because they were doing a triathlon. They changed some of the protocol and used it the first time race day. And they said that their blood glucose dropped to, I think, 50 or 60, and their legs felt, super heavy, and they had to drop out of the race. So it's not something to play around with.
I think that's a mistake most people make or made, and also me. So also when I was running, I tried it. I say, okay, I'm gonna run fast it and take a full bottle. It didn't work out either. So
because so people think that if a certain quantity, 5 grams, 10 grams, 50 grams, if that works, then more must work better. So then they double it or triple it, and more is not better, and it can actually put you into a worse state. For example, lowering blood sugar too much. And we've even found we can talk more about blood sugar and how you can prove it, but we found that it's just so different from every athlete, whether they are a ketogenic athlete or fat adapted athlete, which is not the same thing. You can be fat adapted and eat glucose every single day. If you ride 7 hours a day in professional, you can still be fat adapted. And then you have this glucose based non-keto athlete, and the amount of ketones that they can take are wildly different. Sometimes the keto people can take large quantities without a blood sugar crash, and then the non-keto people, they take just a little bit too much, their blood sugar crashes, and they say, hey, that was the most difficult, heaviest, workout I've ever had, or race. It was just, the perceived effort was much worse. And then they change the protocol around, and they do it right, and they just felt, they felt lighter, they felt it was just easier, the perceived effort. And people say, oh, well, it's placebo. Well, placebo is going to the negative here. It's just not working. So one thing that was super interesting was that you would sometimes fly to the country of the athlete and stick on a continuous glucose monitor, a patch like from Abbott, like $50 to $100, and you would sit by their side and do a training session and somehow show them the ketones working in real time. Can you explain how that works, and what are you looking for in the CGM data, or how do you do your N of 1 experiment to convince the athlete that it works, especially when they've already tried it and they said, oh, it doesn't work?
When you work with world-class athletes, you cannot compare them with fit people. So I always tell them, you have to write your own manual. You have to find out what really works for yourself. And to write this own manual, I use 2 simple things. One is the continuous glucose measurements, where you see sometimes a significant drop in glucose with the ketones. And the other one is just a power meter on a bike, because at the end of the day, the power meter proves whether the ketones work good or bad for you. So I designed 2 simple protocols, one for the blood sugar, where you give a certain amount of ketones at a certain time before training, and then you measure if it drops. Also for sleep, because if you give too much before sleep, the sugar goes too much down. The blood sugar goes too much down, and also sleep is impaired. So we use these monitors.
I want to know more about sleep later, but if the blood sugar drops too much in sleep, does that lead to wake ups? You're more likely to wake up and then have a disturbed sleep, or
no? But I don't think it's good for recovery if your sugar drops too much too fast during sleep. Hence, I have no real scientific proof for it, but for my common sense, I think it's not good that your sugar drops too much all of a sudden if you go to sleep. And I think sleep quality isn't that good. I didn't really check it with the HRV or with the Oura Ring, but I think it makes sense not to drop too much too fast.
What we've seen with sleep, which is we have our own protocol with that, it can be as little as half of a capful of KE4 for someone that is not athletic. Just half of a capful. If you take too much thinking that you want to get a better sleep, it can mess up your sleep, and it can make you have a more shallow sleep, less deep sleep. But when you take the right amount, people on Instagram have shown us their Aura Ring, you know, this is an Aura Ring, their sleep data for the entire week, and then they take the ketone ester and it pops up 45 minutes more deep sleep. And I'm starting to find that if I have a really hard workout, so I normally can only take 1 capful, 5 mLs, if I'm keto. If I'm not keto, you know, you can take more. But if you're already keto, it's kind of has a cumulative effect. So I'll only take 5 mLs. But if I have a really, really hard workout where I'm just exhausted that night, then I can go to 10, 15 and still crash. So it's directly related to how hard you've worked out and how tired you are, because it doesn't necessarily help you go to bed. It's more the recovery in bed. And the Hespel study, I mean, they took the equivalent of 50 mLs before the ride, after the ride, and right before sleep. And it just, to me, it just seems like that's wildly too much. But if you're riding for 7 hours a day full out, okay, maybe. But if you haven't tested, you have to test it multiple times. You shouldn't go straight into game day. If you're already in a race right now in the Tour de France, sure, you can take, you know, 10 mLs, 15 mLs, you know, no risk, but you can't take that peak, you know, potentially maximum protocol of 50. Otherwise it could mess you up.
Well, we go to 30 mLs in the Tour.
Yeah. If they've used it before, that's fine. But if you're new to something and you're on day 4 and you've never tried ketones before, I don't know, maybe 30 mLs is fine because you've been riding for 7 hours. I'd be scared. I don't want to mess anything up. So only a little bit. So you go to the athlete and you put a CGM on them. So how much would you give them? So they would normally weigh, how much do they weigh? 65 kilos?
60, between 65 and 75 kilos. Okay. More or less.
So you want to show them, you know, the blood glucose tanking. So how much do you give them to show them it drops?
Well, I always give him 60. I give him a full bottle to show them they really drop.
Okay.
Because otherwise they gonna experiment and they want to take more. So if they see with 60 they drop, then they realize, okay, we need to take less.
Great. So right.
I prove them the hard way. I prove them the hard way. So then it's obvious. Then it's clear cut. Then they know, okay, it's not less is more. And then we go. And usually we end up with 30.
You end up with 30. So,
but
give them too much. Do they have an empty stomach coming into that experiment where you give them 60 mLs of KE4, like a full bottle? Do you have them empty stomach, or do they have breakfast a few hours before?
On the empty stomach, I give 60. But usually we end up empty stomach with 30 before the run or ride and 30 after the run or ride. Okay. That is usually the good amount. Some athletes combined with food can go to 60 every hour during the ride, not have a drop or not a crucial drop, and then they can perform at the end of the ride. I think they have some kind of glycogen sparing effect. Then they can perform at the end of the ride, because meanwhile we measure also power, and if they can handle a lot, usually they also have better power at the end of the ride. Right. Where we do like a continuous, like 10 minutes. Like I make a program where you do like a 5-hour ride, very standardized, where you have first without ketones. You have a 5-hour ride and you take exactly every hour the maximum amount of carbs you can get, you can absorb, you can handle. So some of them, they can handle 90 grams of carbs every hour for 5 hours. And then I make them do an effort of 10 minutes in the all-out effort in the beginning, 10 minutes, 1 minute, 30 seconds. And we repeat the same effort at the end, 10 minutes, 1 minute, 30 seconds. And you, of course, you see a drop because you rode 5 hours. But then we repeat the same with ketones the first 3 hours. It's like 30 before, 30 after 1 hour, 30 after 2 hours.
Okay.
while taking the same amount of carbs. It's what you call the dual fuel. And then we look at the end if the performance is better. And usually it's better. They equal or almost equal the 10-minute effort from the beginning of the non-ketone ride with the equal or even go harder of the 10-minute effort of the keto ride.
And how do
So
you respond to someone saying, well, that's placebo? Well, that might be placebo because they knew that they were taking ketones, they're trying harder. Like,
well, you don't feel a boost like when you drink half a bottle of whiskey or when you drink five cups of coffee. So it's actually only the power meter that proves you push harder. It's
and
the
are
power
they
meter is the
looking at
proof
their
for me.
power?
That's the final proof.
Are they looking at
Because
the power
you
meter?
might feel worse.
Right.
You might feel worse, but push more. Then it doesn't matter if you feel bad if you finish first.
And are they looking at the power meter during this mini ride, or are they blind to the power
They
meter?
look.
So they're
That's their dashboard, that they're looking constant at their heart rate, power meter. Now, even with the continuous glucose monitors, you can pair them with the Wahoo. You can even see your glucose while you're riding.
wow.
You have to know that with the continuous glucose measure, and that's a mistake also many people make. There's a delay between your blood sugar and your subcutaneous sugar of about 10 minutes. So when you're bunking, you see it 10 minutes later.
Oh, I didn't notice that. I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
because the probe of the sensor is not in the blood flow. It's subcutaneous. It's under the skin. So there's a delay of about 10 minutes. So when you are evaluating the blood glucose and the ketones, you have always to take in account that delay.
And have you found when people take too much ketone ester that their top speed is inhibited and they feel like
Yes,
they're flat?
yes, they see it, but usually in big races, and we're talking also about the best athletes, they start fast, but for them it's still not super fast, and they're also protected by other athletes, so they don't care if they push even 100 watts less because they are protected in the belly of the peloton or by the teammates. So for them, they don't care if they push less in the beginning of the race because they know at the end of the race I'm going to have more power. This is for some races very predictable. For example, when you have Milan-San Remo, which is like a 300 almost kilometer race, you know that the first hours will be easy. That's quite predictable. In some stages in the Tour de France, you don't know. You can predict that at the end is the big climb and okay, we're going to start easy, but some other teams might decide different. And then it's not a good idea to take ketones from the start. Some race tactics are predictable. Some races are very predictable, like Tour of Flanders, when you know, okay, the first 100 kilometers are going to be fast, but not super fast. And then the leaders are still protected by their teammates. So they can actually take ketones in the beginning of the race as a kind of glycogen sparing effect, which still is not proven yet, but I think it's proven by the power meters and not by the scientists.
Right. Yeah, there are two papers, one that talks about glycogen sparing as a possibility, and then another paper where they tried to prove it. They tried to give glucose and ketones. They waited until, and they would ride for 2 hours. They waited until the ketones were down to 0, and then they did a time trial so that the time trial had no ketones left in them. But the idea was to see whether it was glycogen sparing, and that test did not show any benefit. But back to the sprinters.
But that's why you need to. That's why you need to write your own manual.
Right, yeah. Well, that
your
is
own
also
power meter is the only scientific proof.
And some of the researchers have said that they have this certain percentage increase that the average athletes must be in order for it to be proven successful. But then they saw several anomalies where there's some athletes that were just breaking well out of any placebo range. And that's another thing to point to, the personalized, find those exact athletes that had a, huge benefit. But let's go back to the sprinting at the end, because we've gotten some feedback that while it might be glycogen sparing and that sounds sexy, some people, let's say they are able to maintain a 90% speed for, many hours, but then, trying to reach that 100% speed, that last 20 yards of, the final kick of a race can come down to the last, 20 yards, that they feel like they're at their 98, or they're not at the 100%, they're at like the 98%. So some of the strategies that I've tried to explain, and please, if you think otherwise, I have no problem you saying that I'm wrong or that you just tell people differently, but that they might have to kick a little bit earlier. So instead of being able to maintain that 90%, they can, they can go up to 92% and maintain that a little bit longer, or they can kick early and be at, 97, 98%, but then they have to kick, 5-10 minutes prior to when they normally would kick, and people would look at them and say, oh, look at that athlete, they're going out too early, and then laugh at them. But then the way the ketones work is that they can kind of maintain that. Have you ever given that as a race strategy for someone to have to kick a little bit early because they might not have that super top end sprint?
No, we play it safe, and we don't give ketones the last 3 hours of a race.
Okay.
Although there was one study proving that you can do like one super high effort even on ketones. I had a talk with a coach of one of the best teams in the world about this, and he read also that study, or he heard about that study, but we are afraid to apply that, to give that advice, because usually if you give that advice and it doesn't work out, it's not so fun.
Right. But would you ever tell them to change their race strategy? So change their cadence, like what? Or go out and kick early for the end of the race, because other people won't be able to maintain that 95%, as long.
In cycling, the race strategy can never be that precise, because it's going to happen the last hours, but you never know exactly when, because there are 20 teams competing, and only in Milan San Remo you know exactly when it's going to happen, but in most of the races you don't know exactly when it's going to happen. So it would be different if you would be alone in the race, like in a triathlon, where you can say, okay, I do my own pace, but for that, I never gave any specific advice yet.
Okay. All right. So let's see. I've got a whole bunch of questions. So you use the CGM. Do you also see with the CGM during their 5-hour ride, dips? So then you try to time when to add more glucose, before the dips.
The glucose we do very systematically, because then afterwards, on your recording that you took, for example, every time on the hour, the 90 grams more or less, or 45 grams every half an hour. This is what you do when you do your own measurements. But what we see is when we maintain like the same effort, the same wattage, the same power during the 5-hour individual manual ride, that at the end they can maintain a higher level, or they can go higher in their 10-minute effort in power, but also in glucose. So you see that the glucose levels, even with the same glucose loading, are higher at the end. So, and it's quite significant with the people who can take more than 30 grams. It's quite significant that glucose levels at the end are still high while taking the same amount of glucose as without, while doing the same power and taking the same amount of glucose as without the ketones. And so you see a higher glucose at the end when you take ketones in the beginning.
And when you take the ketones every hour, do they just take a bolus at once, or have you ever had them just slow release it into their
They take
water
it in
bottle?
bolus. They take it in bolus. Yeah.
Have you ever tried slow releasing it into a water bottle with their carbohydrates?
Well, you have to think as in a race where you have limited opportunities to drink.
Right. Okay.
Sometimes you have to hold your handlebars, so you cannot say I take a sip every 10 minutes of my water bottle, because it's possible that there's a roundabout or something else coming up. So I prefer, and then they also know exactly what they're taking. They know, okay, I have to drink this bottle, because otherwise, what is a zip? Huh? When you're suffering, your zip is smaller than when you're riding fast. So that's how we try to standardize. It's different with a triathlete, where you can really say you take a zip every 10 minutes. Yeah.
So in the race, if they're taking their glucose, every 60 minutes, are they just chugging a gel cap and then immediately 2 minutes later?
Well, that's individual, but we usually in the beginning of the race they use solid food. They have rice cakes and bars or gels. But we try to, I mean, almost all elite athletes know they have to take within this hour 90 grams or even more, whether it's in a solid form or a liquid form. And they are quite disciplined in it, but it's not exactly timed as when you do it on a training.
Right.
Because if you do your training, you can exactly say, okay, I take every half hour a bar, for example. But here it's okay, I have to have within the first hour 2 bars or a bar and a gel, or you have to, yeah. When you're riding 60K an hour, you cannot grab for your back pocket for a gel. Huh?
Yeah, that makes sense. So what about post workout or post ride? What's the timeline of, do you recommend giving ester, and then how much ester, and then what about their normal recovery shake? Do they wait 5 or 10, 20 minutes for that?
Most protocols use now 30 grams immediately after the stage, and then 10 minutes later their normal recovery shake, which is protein and carbohydrates in a liquid form to be absorbed faster.
Yeah, that would make sense. You can get the ketones will get in your system within 10 minutes anyhow, and then the protein 10 minutes afterward. That's.
And I think of the Tour de France now, this protocol is used, I think maybe by 40% of the teams.
Using the ketones and protein, or the protein shake?
No, the ketones, and then afterwards I think it's not half, but between a third and between 30 and 40%.
Of 30 and 40% of the bottle?
Or? No, 30 or 40% of the teams take
gotcha.
a bottle or half a bottle prior to the recovery shake. I think so. We're almost at that stage now.
Yeah, we find that
safe. And
go ahead.
That's a safe way, because then you don't have the problems of glucose drops, of unexpected strategies. And usually athletes feel they recover better, and they have,
we've even found some athletes that are scared to take it during the race or before the race because it didn't work for them, their top speed was lower, and then they're just taking it post-workout and maybe before bed. But post-workout is the lowest risk way of taking it, because it's not going to mess up the ride you just had, and it's not going to give you GI issues. So it either does nothing or it helps. So that's the lowest risk way, is right after.
Yeah, they take it post-workout, and also prior to dinner or prior to nighttime protein shake.
Okay.
And also what we found out is that when you take it on the easy days, for example, a climber on an easy day, he can take it because he's protected by his teammates. And then on the game day, he's more conservative and he doesn't take it before or in the race anymore. So this is also a strategy you can apply, where you take it only during the race when you're pretty sure that you don't need to do a high effort,
Right.
like when we talk about the stage race.
So let's go back to training. What we've said is that the three most impactful ways that one will notice a difference is if they already do fasted rides, if they're already a fasted rider, and then they take a small amount of ketones every 60 to 90 minutes. We're talking about 10 mLs, maybe 15 mLs every 60 to 90 minutes. Hill workouts, it just tends to work exponentially better on hills, and that has to do, we think, because of the muscles in the mitochondria of the slow twitch muscles. There is more mitochondria, where the fast twitch muscles, there's no mitochondria, so the ketones can't fuel them as well. So it just works exponentially better on hills. And then at altitude, it also works better. So we had one person that his numbers, not semi-professional, his numbers were just crazy, and he wanted to go tell his blogosphere, his followers, about his crazy results. And I said, wait a second, if you just say that it worked well for you, people will take it and expect it to do the same for them. How did you take it? And just coincidentally, he took it. He normally does fasted rides, a 1 hour straight up hill workout with high altitude at the end. So he happened to hit each one of the three things. It's almost as if there was a certain percentage gain for each one of those, and then compiled together, he was seeing a huge gain. So those are the three best ways that we've seen benefit.
Yeah.
Do you agree with those? Do you think there's other ways that it works?
I agree completely. And since you're able to do harder workouts, you come out of the training camp, because usually they do the training camp on altitude with hills. You come out of it stronger, but also since you did a higher effort, you come out of it lighter also. So on top of the performance gain, you also have a weight loss, which of course makes your power to weight ratio even better.
Right.
If you combine it then with evening or post-workout drink, you also have the better recovery, and you come out of the training camp much better.
And let me hear your explanation for why people do fasted workouts. If their watts are going to be higher with the gel pack, why wouldn't they just load up on gel packs? I have my theories, but I think people want to hear from you. Why do people work out fasted?
Well, the magic word is CMPK. That's like intracellular hormone that makes you produce more mitochondria that help you burn fat. And the good thing about mitochondria, once you have them, they last for 6 months, because a muscle cell lives 6 months. So if you have training that induces your CMPK, you produce more mitochondria that you can use even 1 month later. And that's also why your snake water is so good, because there are other factors in there that also enhance the production of mitochondria, even when you're not doing any fasted rides anymore. So a fasted training, fasted workout works the best because it induces CMPK. Once you start eating, you start producing mTORC, which is the other intracellular hormone. It's not a real hormone, but a factor which increases muscle repair and muscle growth, but stops mitochondrial growth and mitochondrial repair. So that's why I recommend my athletes, when they train fasted, that they have to stay 2 hours fasted, which is quite hard. They're quite grumpy. So I say, lock yourself in your room with some Netflix or something else. Don't go amongst people, because you're not going to be an agreeable person. But if you do then real good measurements on aerobic performance and capacity, you have a dramatic effect with the fasted trainings. And on top of that, if you add cofactors or supplements that also enhance the production of CMPK and ketones. So the magic word for fasted rise is CMPK.
And
in my opinion,
that's amazing. Much better put than how I've been explaining it. But you said something about a 2 hour fast. What do you mean? You're talking about people being 12 hours overnight?
No.
Fast.
Post-workout.
Post-workout. Okay, I missed that part.
Because the moment you start eating, you stop the production of CMPK. So if you delay that, you still have the CMPK in the cells. So you still have the stimulation of mitochondria.
And how would ketone esters couldn't ketone esters be taken just a little bit, 5-10 mLs of KE4 after the workout, and maybe an hour later, to make that 2-hour fast better, and not have any detriment, because it's still raising ketones and fueling mitochondria?
I don't know the science behind it, but it works.
But so you're okay.
Quite happy.
You're okay with them doing the, during that 2-hour fast?
Yeah, prior to the exercise, we take the ketone esters, and also after the workout. But then we don't fuel like in the Tour de France with 10 minutes later with a recovery fuel. We just stay fasted, only ketones, and that's it.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then of course after the 2 hours, then you need to fuel, and you need to also to repair your muscles. Then you need also to take some protein.
With what you said with the CMPK, I've told athletes that they're so myopically focused on the race day. How do I take this for race day? I try to explain to them, you might be able to just take this for the month before the race day, and then not take it on the race day at all, because you have your set protocol. You've had, you run a race every 4 months, and it's taken you 5 years to decide the size of the banana and exactly what your protocol is on race day. Don't even take it on race day. Just take it on the month leading up to it, and you've explained how that builds the mitochondria and stays in the system. We had one
for 6 months
who runs a marathon every 2 weeks. So semi-pro, he wins $5,000 a race, and that's his living. He runs it every 2 weeks, and he took ester 3 times in practice, fasted, absolutely loved it. On race day, he took the ester, but then decided to add a banana and a power bar. I said, why did you do that? You didn't do that in the practice. He said, oh, well, I can't run a marathon without food. And I said, well, with the ketones, I think you can. But he said the race was horrible. He said he felt heavy. The perceived effort was worse. He just was dragging. It was hard. It was just horrible. So then we decided to go back to just taking it race day. And then, just taking it in practice. So he took it 3 or 4 times in practice. Again, loved it. Race day, went back to his regular protocol. And he said, Frank, are the ketones still in my system? I had an 18-month performance record, and I was hanging with these Kenyans, and it felt easy, and I felt light on my feet. Were the ketones still in my system? I said, no, you just got so much recovery because you run every 2 weeks. So the recovery benefit, but also, like what you're talking about, just building the mitochondria made it so that race day, you're all queued up as if you had taken 2 months, off or tapered for 2 months for this big race. So yeah, I think people should focus less on game day, and you can get 90% of the benefits just in the working out period. And when you do fasted rides, what is the protocol? Do they use the same amount, or can they use much less when they're straight fasted workouts?
I go sometimes to quite high amounts, but again, write your own manual. Period. Yeah. I go from 60 to 30 mLs.
Has anyone tried and after? Has anyone tried smaller amounts, like 10 mLs every hour when they're fasted for the workouts?
I did, because I had to, because I also learned it the hard way. But actually, my athletes who are maybe better or different than me, they can handle 30 to 60 grams.
And would you consider them fat adapted? But they still are glucose based, but they're fat adapted. They're the strange combination of the two.
Yes.
Or would you? Yeah, but none of them are keto athletes, right? Where in the nighttime, they're not. Everyone's still eating pasta and stuff. No one is
yes.
keto, and okay. So it's a very.
They usually do this kind of training twice a week, and the effect keeps on growing. Like I have like a Olympic runner now, an Olympic marathon runner, and his numbers are still getting better. And we've been doing this system already for almost 2 years. So it keeps working, and I was quite surprised, because we were both thinking that he would like hit a certain plateau where he would, and he's still improving. So it means that you build up, this strategy builds up gradually more and more mitochondria, I think. I don't want to ask him to do a muscle biopsy.
Right. So if you were to design your own clinical trial, because I had a dream of a clinical trial where they would take people fasted rides, hills, and recreate altitude, at least 2 of the 3 of those. And I think that they could prove these gains. How would you, if you had 10 athletes that are either professional or elite, and there's a difference, like you said, how would you try to quote unquote prove it in a clinical trial? How would you design it for 10, 20 athletes? Would it be multi-day? Would it be, a one-off 2-hour time trial? And what quantities would you give?
Well, I would do my protocol I use now already, where they do like the 5-hour ride with the 10-minute effort and the 1-minute effort and the 30-second effort in the first hour and in the last hour, and very standardized the 90 or even 120 grams carbohydrate intake every hour, spread over, but very exactly spread, like for example, half an hour, a gel every half an hour. So they know exactly, even if when they look back at their file of heart rate and power, when they took their gels, like every half an hour, they take a certain amount. And this ride I would compare to a ketone ride, where you give 30 grams before, after 1 hour, and after 2 hours.
And when you say 30 grams, you mean 30 grams of active, which is 1 full bottle, or do you mean 30 grams of this, which is
a half bottle?
Half a bottle.
Half a bottle.
Yeah.
Half a bottle. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
That
well,
would be that's the system I use now. Of course, it would be interesting to measure ketones. It would be interesting, and also, what I forget to add is, with each portion of ketones, I give 1 gram of 3 grams of bicarb, sodium bicarb.
3 grams
Always.
of sodium bicarbs per dose
portion.
And that's just that's just baking soda. 3 grams of baking soda. And when you put it in, it bubbles up a little bit. Is that right?
No, I give them pills.
Oh, pills. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, if you put it straight into the drink, it can bubble up. Okay, so 3 grams of pills. So do you find, if in theory this works better on hills because there's more mitochondria in the slow twitch muscle, do you find your athletes having to or accidentally changing their cadence? So instead of being in the 5th gear, they're in the 6th gear, or just going up hills at a different gear than other people because the muscle's more fresh. The slower the twitch muscle. Have you found anything like that?
I assumed it must be the case, but in Belgium we don't have 1-hour hills, so
or any hill workouts where you might know. I don't know if I'm not a professional athlete or professional cyclist, so I don't know whether if there's a certain hill that you do, once a week for a year, and that in that hill you're on your 7th gear, and then somehow you take the ketone esters, you're like, hey, wait a second, I'm finding myself switching to the 1 gear up or 1 gear down, just changing your cadence.
Well, if you see the good climbers, they always use small gears,
right,
and like a higher cadence, and because, like you say, they use more the endurance fibers, which contains more mitochondria, and then we're back to the mitochondria. So it would make sense that you can maintain a higher cadence when you have more mitochondria, and it would make sense, yes.
Right. Let's see what else. So game day, Tour de France, do they eat breakfast? If they're taking the ketone ester, first thing in the morning,
they need a big breakfast.
Big breakfast, okay. And then how many hours later would they take the ketone ester before the ride?
Now, if you would have like a day in the Tour de France where the last hour is going to be important, then you can take like the 30 grams just before, after 1 hour, and after 2 hours, like the protocol
before the race,
like,
after 1 hour, 2 hours, but then a huge breakfast 2 hours beforehand.
Yeah. Your glycogen needs to be full. You cannot race 7 hours with. And also, after a few days, your glycogen never gets 100% replenished overnight. You need 48 hours. So,
for what it's worth, this is just an N of 1. We did have one athlete who went to training camp, and he was doing 5 or 7 days of 4 to 5 hours per day riding, and he was eating only 1 meal a day, nighttime, and he was just taking ketone esters the entire time, and he was amazed, throughout. He wasn't hungry, and then afterward he'd take a recovery, and then he had to find a way to get more calories in. He said, Frank, I'm not hungry. I'm forcing myself to eat dinner. How can I need a certain amount of calories. So we opened up his window. Instead of just eating at 8 p.m., we opened it up to, 6 to 9 p.m. to have just, more calorie time. But he was able to go fasted straight in, 5-7 days in a row, multi-hour rides. But maybe
Yes,
that was,
but
yeah.
he wouldn't be able to accelerate on a hill or on a bridge or on a crosswind section.
Okay, so it might be better.
That's
for
good
training.
when you can,
Yeah.
when you do like a solo trip or a long ride where you ride every day 5-6 hours, like we would ride to Compostela. It's 2,000 km from here. That might be the case, but you cannot do it in a race, because in a race you have each hour you have accelerations, you have crosswind sections, you have hills, you have bridges. So it would not be possible. Do you know how much he lost? How much kilo he lost in that?
That's what I was going to say. Maybe the goal wasn't necessarily higher watts. The goal was building muscle and losing kilos.
Maintaining muscle and losing fat.
Yeah, I have to find him and ask him what he lost. So you're talking about it working for weight loss. It's probably, I would think, from an appetite suppression standpoint. You don't feel the need for as many calories. Or why do you think that the ester would work? And this is not for someone on a couch eating potato chips, and we don't claim weight loss for that. Drinking the ketones doesn't make your body burn fat. So this is only for elite athletes trying to lose weight, so that their weight ratio. Explain why you think it helps them lose weight. Is it fewer calorie consumptions, or is it something else?
I think it's pure calorie. But then again, if they take a high dose of ketones, the sugar drops, and then they, of course, for sure, they're hungry. So, but I think if you equal the total amount of calories, they're going to eat less, because they feel not so hungry. If they take the right amount, if they take more, for sure they're going to be hungry.
So, of the athletes that aren't, I think you said 40% of the athletes in the Tour de France are taking it now. Do you know if they hide the bottle or put it into empty white bottles to take it so that no one sees it? No one has been public about, or one public about it.
2 weeks ago, I was in Tour de Suisse, is the Tour of Switzerland, and there the soigneurs, at the finish of the race, they had the ketone bottles open, in plain sight. Of course, there was not so much public because of COVID.
Right.
So I don't think that there are many people still deliberately hiding it.
Right. It's more common. We've supplied upwards of 80% of the Tour de France teams, but no one has publicly come out and said that they take it. But it's good to hear that they're not hiding it anymore. So they take it.
They're not hiding it, but of course there are other reasons to hide it, because some are sponsored by other nutrition companies,
right,
and they cannot show that they are using a different brand. So that's part of the reason why some people might hide it.
So you think maybe 40 to 50% of the athletes now take it. Why do you think the other 50% are not taking it? Have they not heard of it? It didn't work for them. They took it wrong, and tried it once and took it. What do you think?
I think it's mostly because they tried it the wrong way. They didn't write their own manual, and they had a bad experience with it, and they say, I never want to do it again anymore.
Yeah. And where do you see this going in 5 to 10 years, as far as a higher percentage of people using it, or it just being more mainstream?
It's hard to predict, but I think the more we know about it, the more specific we'll be able to use it. Like you say, on fasted rides, on training camps, on high endurance training blocks. So I think we will learn more about it, and more how to use it exactly, to combine it with salts, to combine it, the timing with or without food. We will learn, for sure, we will learn more, but mostly from our own manual than from the scientific studies, because at the moment, I think there are not that much scientific studies ongoing. There's one ongoing now with ultra athletes who are actually keto athletes.
Okay.
So who run on fat and nuts and who run like 100K. They who don't have. So there are some studies now with them, but I think we will learn much more about it. Like to say, we've did a long way already. We started by using it in the final of a race, thinking it's going to be an additional fuel, but it's not an additional fuel. It's an alternative fuel. So this we learned already. We know it helps you for recovery. We don't know exactly how, but it does. We know it helps you for weight loss if you know it, if you use it the right way. We think it might help you to increase mitochondria, but we still need to figure out how the dosage and the training and the timing with food. So I think in 5 years we will know much more about it, but for sure ketones won't be gone in 5 years. This is
not.
sure. You won't be out of business.
And you mentioned snake water. So normally we were talking about the quantity of KE4, which is 50% water, 50% ester, and snake water has a lot more water in it, but then it also has some slow carbohydrates and 10 other ingredients. I didn't know that you were using that some. Are you having the athletes use that, or is that just you personally playing with that drink?
It's me personally trying to figure out how I can boost as good as possible CMPK, because that's a bit the holy grail in endurance sports. So, and the substances I use, some of them are also in the snake water. So I was quite happy to see the
ingredients, the
yes.
branched chain amino acids. We have a T-cream in there, which is similar to caffeine, but a little bit different. It's got some nootropics. What about the brain? Have you found anybody taking the ester towards the end of the race more about keeping their brain in line as opposed to the muscles, or have you noticed any nootropic effects of at the end of the race where your brain starts to fail?
No, but a good friend of mine, he's a day trader, so he trades on Nasdaq, but he's based in Europe, so he's actually working half nights. And I told him take a zip every hour, so he takes a zip of KE4 and he finds his brain performance much better. I also tried it with 24-hour car racer. So, but there we go to the small amounts.
Right. Yeah.
Like 5 ml, 10 ml, but there it's hard to like the cyclist is quite easy. You have your power meter, and your power meter shows if you push harder. To design a study for 24-hour car racers is not so easy. Huh?
Right. Yeah. Well, so I think
of course you have glucose, which cannot drop, but there are many more factors which are at the moment hard to determine, but we will figure out, because in 2 weeks I will go to Spa-Francorchamps to do some tests with some athletes where we do like how you call this, reactivity test, where you have some lights flashing on and out and you have to react. And we might do some tests there without ketones during the day.
I think that's going to be the next frontier, is seeing what it does, proving what it does for the brain. Because there was one clinical trial done in Ireland using our ester, and they were going to do sprint trials, intervals. And I said, I don't think it's going to work. If anything, maybe the final sprints might be a little bit better, but I would predict that each sprint average would be a little bit slower. And then I said, well, while you're at it, have them test their brain. And what they found was they did an iPad test, this reaction test, after every wind sprint, and they're vomit inducing wind sprints, not from the ester but just from working out so hard. And they found that the placebo group had started with 2 wrong answers per session and then climbed to 4 wrong answers, where the ketone ester group actually started at 2 and ended at 2. They didn't have any deterioration in their brain. And if someone is faltering in the last 1 or 2 hours of an Ironman, a lot of it's in the brain, not necessarily the muscles. You're second guessing yourself, and if you can fuel the brain, I think that's where there's going to be a different strategy using it for the brain. And there was a paper recently showing that the glucose utilization in extreme sports goes down. So your brain is less able to use glucose towards the end, and ketones bypass that glucose blockage and fuel the brain back up to normal. So if you have this fourth quarter quarterback that's just mentally drained and you bring them back up to normal, that's a huge difference. Not about power so much as your brain just staying intact. And I think there's gonna be a lot more on that front.
Me too.
Yeah.
I think because if you think logically, I mean, ketones are a natural product that you produce when you have no food. So it helps you to look for food.
Yeah.
So it keeps you alert. That's like, it would make sense, but still we need to figure out the right dose and the right way how to use it, I think.
Have you found anybody that you were not able to get it to work for? It just didn't work for their body, or
Yes, the people who take too much.
Yeah. No, but
because they have the lower glucose.
But once you dialed them back to the right amount, has there ever been anyone that you still couldn't get it to work for? They just, even after you spent time with them and changing the amount, you just decided, okay, this is just not for you.
Yeah, but that's logical. Some people don't believe in it also.
But have you had someone that you've tried and they've given a good shot, they've tried it 5 or 10 times, and it just wasn't for them? I mean, it's fine if that's the case.
I found some, but then it's also hard to know what actually caused the fact that it didn't work.
Right.
I tend to think that people, but this is just an assumption of mine, that are good fat burners are also good ketone users. Like what we call in cycling the big engines, the guys who can ride every day. Usually these guys also respond well to MCT oil. Then if you replace the MCT oil or you make the timing different with the ketones, I tend to think that it works better on these people. And
do you think it's possible that there might be more, exploring the glucose side of things, that maybe less glucose, because I kind of see ketones competing with glucose, and is there a solution with a slow carbohydrate as opposed to a fast carbohydrate that might create more lactic acid, might create more inflammation? Because ketones create no lactic acid, like the pathway just is not a dirty fuel. If you can swap out and lower this dirty fuel, lower the glucose, or swap it for a slow carb and increase the ketones, is that a possibility you've played with?
Yeah, but to win a race, you need lactic acid.
Yeah,
that's
calling lactic acid, I've never fully understood that. The lactic acid being a separate fuel. I just think of lactic acid as that's what makes my legs feel like bricks, and that's what slows me down. But it does come around.
It does help you to win the race, huh? Yeah. If after the race your legs feel bad and you're out of breath, it's a kind of, I always call it the oxygen loan. So you loan some oxygen and then you pay it back after the race by heavy breathing and lying on the ground and suffering.
And any thoughts about slow carbohydrates, like an isomaltulose or something that is just less of an insulin spike and more of a steady fuel,
well,
kind of like what we have in the steak water?
Once you're doing exercise, you don't have this insulin spike anymore. Huh?
Oh, right. Sure.
Of course, you use, of course, a lot of slow carbohydrates during a race because you want it to be isotonic. So you have to use long strains of carbohydrates, because otherwise they are too hypertonic. They make your intestines upset.
Okay, so they're already
we always have a combination of glucose, which is fast acting, fructose, which is a fast carbohydrate, and then we have long chains of carbohydrates. So we always use slow carbohydrates in races. We don't bring Coke in a race. Eh?
Okay, I didn't realize that you were already, that they're already using slow. And then for hills, if you have a 5-hour race and you have a 1-hour hill, have you ever tried any selective, taking the ketone ester 15 minutes before that 1-hour hill climb or something precise like that? No.
No, because even on a 1 hour hill, you produce a lot of lactic acid. You're at your lactic threshold, so you still burn a lot of sugar. So there you don't want a glucose drop. So we played safe. If you would find the right amount, it would be interesting, but
maybe not
on training, it's no problem.
Yeah, in a training, yeah. Obviously, you'd want to test this stuff out in training, but I would think that there might be a strategy where you would selectively take ketones and be kind of switching over to that fuel more for the ride because of what it does with hills. Well,
we didn't try that yet.
Yeah. So you work with other sports, Formula One, any mixed martial arts or boxing or fighting?
My son is a European champion Thai box.
Oh yeah.
So and now I made a bet with him this morning. We want to lose the fastest. Who can lose the fastest 7 kilos? So I'm for sure I'm going to use the ketones. I'm going to tell him only afterwards.
Well, I mean, one strategy, we did have an athlete do a 4 or 5 day fast, just taking 5 mLs of KE4 every 3 or 4 hours throughout the day. And then once you get to day 3 or 4 and your endogenous ketones are already high enough, you might not need to take any. So you could just not eat for 4 days.
The problem is that, for example, my son, when he does like the high, he does a lot of high intensity training.
Right. I meant you, not him. I meant you to win that 7 kilo. Win that 7
don't
kilo
worry,
challenge.
I'm gonna win. Don't worry.
Yeah, but yeah, if you're doing high intensity, sprint workouts, fasted, I think you get lightheaded.
It doesn't work. It doesn't work. Yeah. It's also hard on the brain.
Yeah. All right. Well, anything else that I missed? I think we covered so many things that, I have a 90-minute protocol that kind of explains how I suggest to use it, but it's usually more the average athlete, and trying to explain to them if you're normally doing a bunch of glucose, 300 calories of glucose before your workout, and then you want to try ketones and you go into it fasted and you just take 10 calories of ketones, you're not going to have a noticeable performance gain when you go from 300 calories of glucose. You have to be comparing the right apples to apples, and this is a problem. I send some stuff to professional athletes and aren't able to handhold them to take it, and they're like, I don't hear back from them. It didn't work because it's just so easy just to take it wrong because they just want to add it to what they're currently doing.
What I would really recommend is if you're convinced that the fasted workouts will work for you, and you say, okay, I want to increase my mitochondria because they last 6 months and I'm going to be still good in 6 months, that you start gradually building the intensity and the time of the fasted workouts, and not do them every day, because then you start mixing up your hormones. You build too much cortisol, and then they have a negative effect on recovery. So if you want to do fasted trainings, do it smart. Don't do too much too fast, too soon. Don't take too much ketones in the beginning. Also, the period of staying fasted after the workout, don't start immediately with 2 hours. I would start with half an hour and then gradually build it. But for
and the
sure,
fasted workouts, you might start off with twice a week. Is that the type of gradual?
I wouldn't go more than twice a week, because usually my athletes also still have to do like very intense sprints at the end of the race or during the race. So I want the best of both worlds. I want optimized oxygen consumption and fat burn, and a good glucose combustion. So to have and a good recovery. So don't mess up with their growth hormone and catabolic hormones.
Last thing, asthma. Have you seen any athletes that have asthma find even an exponential benefit with the ketone esters, or any asthma breathing?
Well, I used ketone esters because since I'm a general practitioner, I used ketone esters in people recovering from COVID. And actually, I was really surprised of. So what I did is I did a spirometry where you measure the volume you can breathe out and the speed you can breathe out. So the speed you can breathe out, you can compare with asthma. If you breathe out to a straw or through a garden hose, it's different. Asthma is the straw, the garden hose is a normal airway. And so I did these measurements, and then I gave only a little amount of ketones, like 10 to 15 ml of the Key4. And 15 minutes later, I did the measurements again, and I saw an increase both in lung volume as in the peak flow, like the speed which you exhale. And I didn't understand because the amount of energy you give is not so big. So there has to be still an undiscovered pathway for which people with lung problems have a benefit of it. So then I said, okay, maybe my athletes who have asthma will also have an additional beneficial effect of it. And I tend to think it's like that. But still, I don't have any studies on it. But I think we will figure out later on what the effect is of ketones on asthma, on bronchoconstriction.
What percentage gain did you see in those people with limited breathing capacity? We're talking 5%, 25%?
Up to 15. And if I didn't do the measurements myself, I wouldn't have believed it.
15, 1.5?
1.5, yeah.
Yeah, 15%. Yeah. And what about if you tested people without breathing impairment, did they have any breathing increase, or was it just those that were impaired?
No, it's you. I mean, once your lungs are open, they're open.
Exactly.
When the door is open, it's open. You don't build extra lungs with it, or you don't make your airway bigger. It's only when it's constricted due to sickness that you can open it again, but you cannot make it wider.
Yeah, that is amazing.
Bigger.
Hopefully that'll be.
When the door is closed, you can open it, but once it's open, you cannot make the door hole bigger.
I hope that can be proven with people with breathing problems in a placebo-controlled, because people might say, oh, it was placebo effect, which I don't know how you can breathe better with placebo, but everyone wants to see, placebo-controlled. So hopefully one day that will be tested. Oh, heart rate. Have you noticed anything different in heart rate with athletes taking the ketone ester, it being higher or lower? Have you noticed?
Not substantially.
So what we've noticed, for what it's worth, is when people are fasted and they're taking just ketones, that they are seeing like a 7 beat per minute lower heart rate. This is why I'm talking about whether glucose is raising the heart and ketones are keeping the heart rate down. We had one athlete, semi-professional, which is different than the pros, where he would normally be 20% of his 1 hour race in zone 5. But then when he took the ester, he shifted everything over to zone 4. So he barely touched zone 5, and his heart rate was 7 beats per minute lower, and his watts were higher. So he was able to do more at a lower heart rate. And that's what got me thinking, well, maybe there's a way to limit the glucose and have this heart rate be more efficient and lower and just be ketones. And thoughts on.
Or he was asthmatic and he got more oxygen.
I will ask.
It's also possible.
I will ask him.
If he's an asthmatic athlete, then it would have opened his airways, which might cause the better performance and lower heart rate. This is also a possibility.
I will ask him. We had another athlete, Daniel Holloway. He said that he did a crit, I think the national championship race, 1 hour, same course, and versus last year, he was able to track 7 beats per minute lower heart rate using the ketones. But meanwhile, Professor Hespel has seen, I think, higher heart rates using glucose and ketones. So I'm wondering whether maybe the dual fuel might become more of like a stimulant that increases heart rate, whereas if you can just use the ketones by itself, the heart rate might be lower. But that's just something to look into, is heart rate, because if you can shift your heart rate and it be in a different zone for the same watt consumption, or the same watt output, that would, that can change a lot of things if you can change your heart rate.
Well, at the end of the day, it's just the watts that make the difference. Huh?
But if you can do
cross
the
the finish
watts
line
more
first,
easily,
it matters. It
but
doesn't care.
if you can do the same watts at a lower heart rate and it's more easy and less taxing on the body, I thought that might.
Yeah. Still a lot to discuss.
All right. Well, thank you very much. That was amazing. I think people will, this is the type of thing I'm going to go back and watch it a couple times, where people will really want to watch it and really nail down exactly, how you're proving it with your athletes. And hopefully maybe this will save you some time. If you start explaining to an athlete and it takes you 2 hours to explain it, now you can just, send them the video, say, start with that, watch that video, and then, we can go into custom tailoring it for you. And that really is important, to having, a custom tailored protocol. Well, thank you very much. And, have fun watching the rest of the Tour de France, and hopefully your athletes will do well. Sometimes I do get text messages from you saying so-and-so did great, and they were ketones helped a lot.
They were happy. Yeah.
I like seeing those texts.
Okay, I will let you know if I beat my son.
All right. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.